Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. In this hour, we're going to be speaking with John Hogue about, again, what's coming up for 2015. Let me tell you a little bit about John and bring him on the air. John Hogue defines himself as a rogue scholar. He is a world-renowned authority on Nostradamus and other prophetic traditions. His work is critically acclaimed for cutting through the social, religious, and nationalistic projections of prophets and their interpretations to find the threads of insights they all share. His webpage is hogueprophecy.com. And I was supposed to write down the name of a book that I was supposed to mention at the beginning, but I didn't. But it was like a book about predictions for 2015, but I'm sure he'll be more than happy to share that with us. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, John Hogue. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Rita. I'm doing good. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Your new book that just came out for 2015?
Yeah, it is. It's actually something I've not done before. I had this book on 2015 that turned into this 100,000 word monster that I'm still banging away at. That's going to be released maybe. Well, I can promise that it will be released by New Year's, Chinese New Year's. But
okay,
which
is in February for those people that didn't get that joke.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, I had an idea to take 10 very short essays on 10 very key defining predictions for the next year, followed up by an essay that I wrote for a group that was meeting with a certain billionaire to talk about the future in 2015 in Santa Barbara. Who will remain, for this point, anonymous. But I thought that I should write something, since I'm going to be addressing the 1%ers of the world in this little meeting. I wrote an essay called The Future of Richness. And so I end this little booklet of about 11,000 words on that. And I put it out there on the 20th of December. It has since become a #1 bestseller in Amazon for prophecy and divination genre.
That's cool.
Yeah. It's
very cool.
It's taking off. It's quick. It's an easy read. It's a very comprehensive read. And if you go to hogueprophecy.com, just beneath the two characters in the interview, which is the first article in the stream there, you'll see to the right the cover, and click on it and you can read a little more about it. And if you like it, you can sample the free part of it. That's always there in Amazon. And if you like that, then feed the kitty.
Yeah, we like that. I mean, especially since, the holidays have just passed. And so it won't be till next year that they'll need those stocking stuffers. But if you have a birthday coming up, or Valentine's Day, or I don't know, some holiday that you'd want to buy somebody a nice gift.
Well, and not only that, it's only $2.99. So
it's a bargain.
Yeah, it's $2.99. It's an ebook, so it's also what usually happens this time of year is this is the time when people would love to hear more about what's coming next. And since I've been doing these things since 2007, doing a new book each year, this is kind of, especially for a lot of people who've been waiting for the bigger version of this that's going to expand on this quite a lot. I just actually brought it into the first draft world right now. It's now the hardest part for me for writing is drawing it out of the ethers and having all the Play-Doh on my plate, as it were. And now the fun begins, the editing and putting it and honing and doing all that. But it is a huge pile of Play-Doh.
Words. Yeah. Hey, but you know what? I have to tell you this. This is the start of our 9th year. So we aired Just Energy Radio the first it was Friday. We were Friday night. So the first Friday in 2007. And so it sounds like you did your first ebook in 2007 as well. So we're like on a similar timeline.
We're on the 7 vibration.
That's right.
Yes. 7-Eleven.
Okay. Let's talk prophecy. Before we get into detailing what you see coming up for 2015, perhaps you can enlighten the audience with how you come up with your information. Do you use charts? Do you channel the information? Do extraterrestrials come and leave you little messages? Do they come through in your dreams? Or is it all of the above?
Well, I can say one thing for sure. I don't get probed by extraterrestrials. But wrong use of words. The thing that I basically do is I seek a balance between doing all the trend research, being on one hand a futurologist, look at the trends, look at the data, watch the news, watch the things that are going on around the world, try to get as many different views of news, because they all have a certain slant, of course, but in the last few years, American mainstream news has gotten so into its own slant that it's, I have to go to Russia Today to find out what's really happening in my own country, or Al Jazeera. But there also, over the years, I've come to use a lot of, on the equally dangerous world of the internet, when it comes to wild wives' tales, found certain groups and people that consistently give an alternative view to the world that's probably quite accurate. So I do all that. And then I do what is basically getting out of the way. Just before the show, we were talking a bit about opera, and I used to be an opera singer, and how a lot of people, when they pretend to be opera singers, they usually actually do what's opposite to what an opera singer is trained to do. To make that kind of big sound, they actually tighten up their throat and go and like that, and sound incredibly constipated. And in a way, there's a comparison to that, to how a lot of people who do prophecy try to push themselves into a state to create the trance, to see the future, using magic circles and brass tripods and whatnot, and any series of divinatory tools. But I have come through 30 years of this, of following something that goes back to my operatic roots. And that is learning how to see the future like I used to sing. And that is finding that knack of the effortless effort, where you actually, to make the big sound, as in making the insightful look into the future, you have to get out of your own way. The messenger has to get out of his or her own way. To do that is kind of a strange paradoxical meeting of effort and relaxation, where they are perfectly in balance. There's an opening. And in that opening, there is an effortless understanding that can then take this subjective experience into all the data that I have done, all the trend research, which is more objective. And basically, I contend, it tells me which trends and which people and which things are actually going to go somewhere in the future or not. And then I write. I
guess what you're saying is you drink a beer and you start writing.
I usually have a gin and tonic after.
Okay.
It's more to come down. One of my friends once said to me, he said, "I think you were born with LSD in your system, so you don't need to take it."
I'm not even going to touch that one. Not even going to touch that. Okay, so we have so finite time, so I'm just going to move us along.
All right.
For years, and we were talking about this in the last hour, but for years I felt like we've been on a tipping point for our future. Do you think that we still have time to save ourselves from our own bad devices?
Well, we have we're running out of time to prevent, but that doesn't mean we're going to run out of time to cure. That's why in both these books on 2015, including the booklet, the first prediction of the 10 is a little essay about how I name this year the year of last chances. And that means this 2015 is the last chance for us to use what astrologically has been given to us by these few years of Saturn transiting through Scorpio. And in layman's terms, that happens every 28, 29 years. And in those 2.5 to 3 years when it's happening, that has often been, in particular in the case of America, the time when America has an opportunity to redefine itself and recreate its dream. Now, America and the American dream has gone through these cyclical changes. Sometimes we have this debate, a national debate, and then we kind of redefine ourselves. And other times we kind of let it slide. And then what happens is that we have a whole lot of karmic Saturnian consequences that happen after that. We are in that time where we need to redefine ourselves. And unfortunately, we're running out of time in this transit. We've basically kicked the can of redefinition down the road. And so by the end of the summer, when Saturn nudges back into Scorpio through June through September, is the last chance for political reforms and other things that are mainly ruled by Scorpio Saturn, which is the economy, monetary systems. How do you bank? How do you separate the financial systems from banking systems? Rules and laws, responsibility. That's what Saturn's all about. And hold on, somebody was calling.
Really? That's what that was?
Yeah. I just had they might call again. I might have to, that'd be a friend of mine, a fellow writer, J.R. Rain, on the road somewhere. Anyway, basically what we come down is Saturn and Scorpio rules inheritances. And so we basically have to ask what kind of future and what kind of world do we want to inherit in after the summer of this new year. And to get back to your point, have we run out of time? We are definitely running out of time to anticipate problems, to begin the reforms that we need to do with structures of our society, economy, way the human race defines itself in relationship with its own planet and its own climate. All of that is coming to a head, and we're most likely going to make some changes, some starts, and certainly I see a lot of localized work being done that's not even being reported in the news, because most of the news is seeing the world through corporate haze and not seeing the power of the little people, of the power of local governments and local movements to do the things that, for instance, in Paris, they're all going to meet the leaders of the world in Paris in November through early December in probably the worst astrological aspects for what they want to do, and that is to create at last a legally binding carbon emissions law that people will subscribe to and sign to, that will try to keep the world from rising its temperatures beyond what are 205 global warming levels in 2030. The problem is that I predict that it's too little and it's too late, and the compromises that will be made will make this baby teeth. And frankly, what we need to do is not keep the levels to the 2005 level. We need to actually curtail carbon emissions by 80%, not 20% or 25% by 2030, because we are now entering a period of where something I've been warning for years is becoming more mainstream attention, and that is what I call the great invisible supervolcano that at this moment, if you could see it, is a caldera the width of the Arctic Circle. It's absolutely fuming our atmosphere with methane and CO2 from the melting permafrosts all around the ring of the northern polar sea. And it's also, as I predicted in this book, we're going to start seeing what's happening up in the north with the great meltdowns beginning to happen in the Antarctic, which has been relatively stable. But now it's going to show similar signs like Greenland and other areas of melt. The danger that this brings up is I used to say that civilization was threatened, but now we're setting the stage for our own species to be endangered if the methane hydrates, which are the largest store of carbon that the Earth stores from it falling into the ocean and turning into this slurry of ice at the continental shelves. We're reaching a point where we're heating up the ocean enough that some of that may start doing what I call the carbon Kali Yuga Coca-Cola fizz, where it begins to bubble out like as the old country music song used to say, and she left me like the bubbles in my beer. The methane leaves the ocean and goes into the atmosphere and creates a situation where we're not now threatened with a 6 degree Celsius increase of the climate. We are going to be threatened with a 12 degree Celsius climb in the mean temperature of the world by the end of the century, which would match what they think happened in the Permian extinction, which in 80,000 years' time killed all but 4% of all life on Earth. And so, in short, we're creating at a much faster rate that has never been seen before an extinction level event. So what I'm coming to is that this danger is our new Hitler and the Axis powers, that people finally kind of wake up and pull up their sleeves and say, we've got to defeat this or else we enter a new dark age. And this is cyclical. This happened, it's called the fourth turning, and it happens that there's a 20-year period of crisis. Last time it happened was the 1930s and 40s. We are back in that cycle now, and rather than an Adolf Hitler to fight, we have to fight stupid, which is in us. It is a new kind of fascism, the fascism of stupidity, that's based on habit, that's based on a fear to change, and this threat that is coming is going to scare us enough to, I think, fix it. And I will also say that the economic collapses that are coming, just like the previous depression, will not be fixed by the attempts to fix it back then in the 30s as even now. They will be fixed by the world's economy being geared towards stopping climate change. And that will start just like building the arsenal of democracy that America did. That got America out of the Depression. It wasn't anything that Roosevelt did. It was the war with Hitler. And this war with our stupidity and what it's doing to our planet's climate and to our future, eventually, sooner or later, in the 2020s at the latest, or even the 2030s, is going to get so bad that people are going to understand that they've got to fight it, a new kind of subtle enemy. We have met the enemy, and they are us. And the enemy is stupid.
Well, and I don't think that people will... No, I want to say it different. I think people would be willing to make changes if, one, they weren't forced on them, or two, they weren't so freaking expensive to incorporate into your life. We look at. I'm just going to use the example of light bulbs. You know, they want people to not use the incandescent light bulbs. Go to the more energy efficient, those coil kind that suck. I mean, they just suck. They don't light a room. Okay, so you buy them, but they're more expensive than the incandescent one. Then you get the LED ones, which are 10, 12, 15, $20 a piece. Now they last longer, but they make it be so hard to do what would be good for the environment. They make plastic, my favorite, they make plastic bags that are environmentally friendly. Okay, so it's thinner plastic in the plastic bags, but then they charge you more money. Really? Really?
Well, all of that is a repetition of what happened. Things always repeat themselves because, a society that tries to take what I would call enlightened, birthright enlightened beings into a process of de-education that turns them into functional mediocrities, that kind of society can't. It will always do things piecemeal. It will always. It did it back in the 30s when people saw Hitler coming. People saw what was coming afoot with the rise of militarism, and people saw that their tariffs and the breakup is similar to what we're doing now. Rather, we had this global society starting. Now we've had this idea to create a phony nuclear confrontation, potential Cold War nuclear confrontation with Russia, and which is the whole subject of another book of prophecies from the World War prophets that we talked about in our last show, A New Cold War, was the prophecies of Nostradamus, Stormberger, and Edgar Cayce, which I published in July last year. It is, we are creating we're piecemeal, too little, too late in the way we treat the climate, like we were piecemeal, too little, too late with the economy that created a climate that created fascism and militarism that created the Second World War. And so it's not until the boom is lowered. It's not. We're going to have shocking moments like invasion of Poland moments, Pearl Harbor moments, and invasion of the Soviet Union moments that makes the whole world catch their breath. And unfortunately, that means that sooner or later, perhaps in the next 2 hurricane seasons, a Category 3 or 4 hurricane going up the Potomac might actually force the president and the Congress to evacuate Washington, D.C. Or you will have a return of a Hurricane Sandy that's a Category 5 that takes down New York City. And those are like Pearl Harbor, Hitler invading the Soviet Union kind of moments in this war that Mother Nature is waging against our stupidity to get our attention. And so those kind of shockers, it's bigger than losing 3,000 people and 2 towers falling in New York. This is where you lose New York. And that disrupts.
And Florida.
Yeah. And that disrupts. That is such a shocker that it makes the whole world has to look at it. They have to deal with it. They have to stop playing with their silly little LED light bulbs and their little issues about, do I get a plastic bag or not at the supermarket because I'm trying to save the earth? And then actually look at, carbon is the problem. We are belching it. We need to cut it at the root, and we've got 10, 20 years to do it, and we roll up our sleeves and do it, and we reach that point where the human race realizes it must make the sacrifices to survive. That we went to war to stop the spread of fascism and to keep our world as we knew it to survivable democracies. We didn't want to go into the war. We did it. And there was a lot of sacrifice that went with that. When the point critical mass collective understanding arises where people understand that we may not have a future on this planet if we don't change, then the political will be there for changes to be made. What I'm concerned about, though, is that it by kicking the can down the road, by keeping the fiat economy going rather than having a new Bretton Woods arrangement where world leaders have to do what they did at the end of World War II and redefine what economic rules and structures are, we are in that point now where the world is needing a new system, a new currency system, economic system that is beyond the kind of monopoly funny money system that we've been on since 1971 when we started floating currencies. That's coming to a head. The good news
but in what you're suggesting, what seems like it would be a good solution, quote unquote, would be to have a universal banking system, a universal currency, and that's a little scary.
Well, here's the thing. There will be a universal international currency, and it's going to be born out of cryptocurrencies. We're going to see, it's still Wild West in that realm, but I predict, for the record, that what we're seeing, there's going to be an economic crash. I call it the Greater Depression. But the good news is, unlike the last one, in the last fourth turning of the cycle of crises for the world, the economy was not so diverse, so everybody went down with the economy and had to grimly go on with it for a decade until World War II kind of threw us out of it, for better or worse. Then, what we have now, though, is a world where, as I was saying earlier, there's a revolution going on in society, and it's the power of the individual, as centralized banking, as centralized governments, as a new kind of fascism that has a corporate face starts to take over the world. The response to that is more and more people being whistleblowers, more and more people trying to find new technologies through this new social media to actually keep their privacy, keep their freedoms, and actually take the power of even something as simple as a transaction with another human being completely out of the centralized banking system or the currency systems that are based on nationalistic political prisms. And this is what is happening with turning. We're even probably going to abandon even the idea and the concept of gold, because what we're going to replace it with is math.
Math? Did you say math?
Mathematics. Mathematics is going in the future. This is a very Aquarian age kind of thing. Mathematics, the creation of numbers, datum dollars, is going to be the new kind of currency that does not require a bank, does not require a Federal Reserve. It does not require me to do anything but get on my computer, make a transaction with somebody else in the world instantaneously, without borders, without limits. And this is one of the things that's coming up, and I talk about this in both books on 2015. I call it the decentralization revolution. It's going to affect how we view power grids of politics, the power grids of electricity, the power grids of everything. And because there's these new revolutionary ideas in science and technology that are going to empower the individual. For instance, you will soon have a little box in your office or in your house that will power your house. You will not need to be on the grid. The grid will be made irrelevant. There are things happening in politics where people are understanding on a local level that they have the power to overthrow laws that are old-fashioned and suppressing voters' rights. Take, for instance, the movement that's hardly talked about in the news, which is a big movement of states making legislation that makes the Electoral College, their electors that pick the president, because frankly, folks, you've never picked the president of the United States in your elections. They are picked by electors that you vote for. And if the majority of
we don't even vote for them. We don't even know who they are.
They are given, are empowered with our votes to make the decisions that are the votes that really vote in the president. So the thing that's happened since the fiasco that happened in Florida in 2000 with the voter counts is that states are starting to simply legislate that, okay, all our electors will automatically be given to the person who wins the majority of votes in the nation. So what they've done is they haven't tried to fight with a new amendment to pass through 2/3 of Congress to get the Electoral College overthrown. They say, hey, Electoral College can just last and be there as a nice museum piece, because what will happen is, and it will probably happen in the next election, you will never see a Florida recount situation again, because people power is moved by then, I predict, to have enough of the 270 electoral votes by states who simply are going to dedicate their electors to vote for the one who wins the popular vote, that there will never be a president that is elected with electoral votes, but not the popular vote, like happened with Al Gore against Bush, where Gore won 500,000 more votes in the United States than Bush, but he lost because he didn't have the electoral votes. So that's one example how people are re-empowering themselves to, and the same with cities, even where I live up in the Northwest here. We don't have to wait for the idiots going to Paris to get real and start cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to 80%. There are towns and cities and boroughs and communities that are doing it on their own. And as that grows and grows, more people are going to come to see it. It's almost like people are not going to reform these stupid systems that have come to this kind of crystallization of systemic collapse. They're just going to walk away from it. If people hold on to the old economic systems, they will regionally and individually suffer the next Greater Depression. But the blessing of our times is there are alternatives to that with cryptocurrency and other forms of economic structuring that are not part of that system. And people will just buy and sell and make their money and make their businesses on those. And they're based on basically an internet Bitcoin format.
Well, and I've seen a very big movement of people wanting to become self-sufficient, self-reliant, putting in gardens in their backyards, putting in solar or other means of generating heat or electricity in their homes, and trying to utilize nature and the resources that they have at hand versus buying into, what's at the supermarket or whatever. They're trying to just take more ownership of the direction of their lives.
Yes. That's what's happening. That's the power shift that's happening. You'll begin to see much more of it accessible, and you'll notice it much more in this new year. But it's been slowly building, and it will eventually become, it's called alternative media, alternative economies, alternatives. But the truth is, it's the future mainstream. And what's going to happen is all these so-called mainstream things, they're becoming anachronism streams. And because most people still get their information through that filter, a lot of these things are not known by most people are happening. So I try to do my bit by not only forecasting the trends, but also making people aware of these movements and things that are going on that their corporate-run politicians and media don't want them to know about, because it's like finding out that cigarettes make cancer. They don't want you to know about that. Global warming, fossil fuels make a cancer in our climate that could threaten the world. And so just like we eventually found out after a lot of publicity and propaganda to keep people from knowing that cigarettes were harmful for our health, CO2 and carbon emissions is equally far more harmful to our health and our future. And like what happened before, eventually the truth, through grassroots understanding, succeeds and endures. And that will happen in this situation. The question I look at is not whether we will lose it or be destroyed, but more how much pain and suffering do we need to hurl on ourselves from the consequences of our stupidity and the consequences of not making these changes. That may make the next 2 decades quite rocky and quite painful. But birth is also painful, and travails sometimes bring new life.
I'm going to change topics here. In the last couple of years, it seems like the United States has been losing its economic strength. Do you see the end of the petrodollar or American superiority around the world coming up in 2015?
It's actually, this is I call 2015 not only the year of last chances, but the year one, that 2014 was the end of the American century. which began 100 years ago with the consequences of stupid actions of the center of then the known world in 1914, which was the European imperial powers, going to war for really no great reason, that a war that nobody wanted to wage. And that set in motion by 1918, in 4 short years, a situation where America emerged in its century as the next great power after the British Empire. We had to save them from the mess that they created, and suddenly we had cachet, political cachet, and influence. And so from then on, because it was born in the actions of 1914, I talked about how in my last book about predictions for 2014 that we are repeating this 1914-2014 triggering, catalyzing in the next 4 years. By 2018, I think you will clearly see, just as the European empires had been overturned and the whole world had been changed, you will see by 2018 this shift of power and economic focus and history's focus away from America and towards Eurasia, in the guise of China, and also in the guise of Russia and China and the BRIC alliance, that is India, China, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil. They're going to see NATO fade and be replaced by the Shanghai Accord. I don't have the right name of it right now, but that is an agreement that basically is not only an economic but a military alliance of those nations in Eurasia that are east-leaning. And rather than adapt to this, we have been doing things, and will go on in this year doing things that are based on a false narrative that the American century is still happening. We will try to exacerbate issue between Russia and America and Europe, which is going to cause a serious recession. The sanctions against Russia are going to blow back onto Europe. Germany is already predicting a recession in this year, and Germany is the core economically of the EU. The EU, American politicians are trying to get the EU monetary union to do their natural gas business and everything with Americans. The problem with that idea is that we are at least 11 years away from being able to actually ship any of our fossil fuels to them to replace the cheap and affordable and readily available gas that comes out of Russia. So it is. We are in the midst of a shift of history's axis in 2015. It began in 2014. It is on the move now. And this is now becoming East Asia's century. I don't think it can just be called China, because that's also an attitude of the past that's changing. It's the kind of attitude that was there in a bipolar world that was created after the New World Order was reestablished in 1945. That order is now crumbling. It is not just cracking. We're going to watch it begin to crumble in the next 4 years. And by 2018, it'll be a very different world. As different as the world changed from 1914 to 1918.
Well, okay.
So learn your Mandarin.
Well, I mean, I can eat with chopsticks. Does that count?
I love Asian food, so
I do too. I mean, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. I lived in California when the Vietnamese first started emigrating to America, and I'd go eat Vietnamese food, and people were like, well, they don't serve, I won't say, but, good stuff. You shouldn't eat there. And I'm like, hey, if it tastes good, I'm good.
Well, and what will happen with this is America is going to lose its empire just like England lost its empire, although it's going to be much faster. The U.S. dollar is going to still be there as a major currency, but it will not be the only reserve currency.
It will be so pitiful. We have become so arrogant as a country and a people to believe that we're second best. Please.
Well, and the petrodollar, to answer your question, is definitely, what was triggered by all these sanctions against Russia last year is really the beginning of the end of the petrodollar. That'll be the karmic consequence of it, because basically it's that last it's that last nudge that's finally the world is saying, you know what? We are not centered on America anymore. Since 1945, we were, because America was, for better or worse, was the last surviving center where half the gold was, where it was the only economy that was still vibrant, where the rest of the world in World War II had lost their economies, were devastated. But now the world's changed. It's become multipolar. It's become multi-ethnic, multi-politically ethnic in a way. So it's more about vive la différence rather than my way or the highway, all American. And, unfortunately, it's like what happened with the ancient regime of the French Empire before it descended into a revolution at the end of the 18th century. They just thought they were the center of the continental Europe when they were slipping. But they, like us, kind of had this idea of, we're never going to be number 2. We just can't think that, even as you're becoming number 3, number 4. And then suddenly you find yourself with people knocking on your palace doors with pitchforks. And you go, how did we get there from here? Well, the problem with the human mind is it can handle sudden emergencies very well, but a slow developing catastrophe is always something like climate change, like when your systemic structures of your society begin to crumble over generations of time. It's very hard for people to grasp that, and they don't listen to the people who warn them of it. They often persecute them or laugh at them until it's too late. And then they look at them with respect of hindsight, and hindsight has a hind in it. It's asinine. So it's one of the reasons why I call Nostradamus a great failure as a prophet, is that he's so regarded for in the hindsight of his readers for having foreseen so many things. But he should have been a better prophet to have helped teach people to have a foresight to prevent it. And he didn't.
But I think that is true with any kind of prophecy, is that it's a statement, but you don't really understand how it applies until after the fact.
I think in our times now, with the sophistication of information, there's far more chance now. For instance, most people didn't know about Nostradamus' prophecies, but I'm talking on your show. I've talked to, I once was on a show. I'm going to be on Coast to Coast later tonight. I once, in February of 2013, when the popes were changing, I sat for a few minutes and talked to 140 million Russians on Russia Channel 1. A person who is involved in prophecy, either translating them or making them, now has a global audience, now has the same internet that's there, where ideas now are much more accessible. So a person who's warning or sees trends has much more access to the rank and file of the world to make changes. So I think more than any other time in the world, people in the forecasting business can help prevent things from happening.
Okay, but that's professional talking about professional, and giving people the information that they can work with versus giving people, here's some just generic prophecy. I mean, I'm using Nostradamus specifically. Here's some generic prophecy, and you need to figure out how that applies to you. If it's getting interpreted and this is the things we need to watch out for, then it's more hands-on and tangible for people.
Well, that's what I do. In my books, I try to...
That's what you do.
Yeah, that's what I do. I try to take these prophecies and I try to make them understandable and build a bridge. Most prophecy books, when I grew up reading them, I was thinking, these books always tell us wonderfully how terrible we are in the present. And then they always shine a golden aged light on how wonderful we'll be in the future. But there's this huge gulf between the end of the story and the beginning of the story that I've sought through my life as a writer to try to bridge, to show you step by step how you have a global society that works, step by step I'm going to set out a bunch of short books that are going to look at important things like the kind of politics. What's politics going to do in the next 1,000 years? What's economic models going to evolve into in the next 1,000 years? Step by step. And utopias can only exist if there's a bridge built to them, step by step. And it has to address the difficult birthing stages. And that's what I try to do in my work more and more now.
For this period of time, and I don't necessarily mean 2015 specifically, have you unearthed, read, whatever the correct word would be, any prophecies of Nostradamus that fits well into this time period?
Oh, yes. A lot of them deal with his astrology. We're already in the situation where we discussed earlier last year about the new Cold War, where there's these two timelines in astrology that he puts out. He actually says there's a short timeline and a long timeline for a second Cold War that is set up by the time when the great northern kings that rule the world are eagle kings, he calls them. Well, their totems are eagles. That would mean when Russia dropped being the Soviet Union and readopted the presidential flag, which has the two-headed eagle as the state flag, to our bald eagle as our totem for America. They're talking about us, and that happened in 1992. So that tells me that we're in the window of these events starting in 1992. And then the question is, where do you begin the countdown that's either 13 years long or 3 years and 7 months long? And that's kind of given to us to define. And last year I defined it as the start of the Ukraine-Crimean crisis. And the fact that you could even also say just recently when the Congress made a resolution, that resolution reads as a declaration of a new Cold War to contain Russia. That to me could be the time you start counting 3 years and 7 months, which would take you towards the end of the first year of the next president of the United States, probably getting into what I say in the 2015 book is a Ukrainian missile crisis, which is kind of a variation on a theme of the Cuban Missile Crisis that happened in 1962, where we suddenly set into motion and I talk about it as there's a thing called the karmic echo that I've uncovered in the patterns of the future, where lessons that aren't collectively learned by nations and humanity come back every 20, 40 to 80 years. And they come back in a reverse negative of what they were. Take, for example, America puts advisors into Vietnam. An incident happens that turns out not to have really happened, the Gulf of Tonkin, and a Democrat, President Johnson, gets us into a quagmire that harms the nation. 40 years later, in 2003, the karmic echo has returned with another Texan president, but he's a Republican this time, getting us into a new quagmire. It's not a jungle, it's a desert in Iraq, and it's based on weapons of mass destruction, which is the Gulf of Tonkin snafu that never happened. There weren't any. So in this way, I'm seeing a karmic echo back to the Cuban Missile Crisis happening as soon as this new year, although more likely when I look at the astrology of Nostradamus, it's happening in the summer of 2016, where we are faced with two possibilities: a crisis in Ukraine, which will be divided into an East and West Ukraine, similar to in the last Cold War to the East and West German issue, where you have Russians and NATO eyeball to eyeball across a barbed wire border. It's not on the River Elbe anymore. It's separation of the eastern provinces of Ukraine in Novi Russia with the Kiev regime in western Ukraine, which is now becoming part of NATO. Something happens, a missile's fired or some incident happens that suddenly brings us into a potential nuclear confrontation with Russia as soon as the first year of the next president of the United States, which could either be Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton, because our choices for picking the president in the next election is not going to be the choices ours. It's going to be the choices theirs. That means the forces that have created a corporate creeping coup d'etat since Citizens United was passed by the Supreme Court in 2010. This creeping coup d'etat will be completed in the presidential elections of 2016, where the choice that we have to pick from is theirs, either Hillary or Coca-Cola Bush or Pepsi Hillary Clinton. And the problem with the latter
But is it really our choice? And do we really elect the president? Really?
Well, not in 2016. So what I hope will happen as the unintended consequences of these power trippers is that people are going to finally understand that the political system, like I was saying earlier about trying to fix the fiat economy, people will understand that it cannot be fixed. They just have to create an alternative. And there's not a third-party solution to this problem. There's simply, I would say, we have to abolish all parties and look at our political responsibilities from a whole new light as the responsibility of community rather than party. And communities don't exist in this gotcha polarizing. They don't survive if the construct of a community is always in a polarized, divide and conquer. We're going to have our platform, your platform. When we live in community, we have to find ways of reaching for common ground and nourishing those things that we all share and tolerating those things that we disagree with, because we have a picture of the bigger need of stability of our community. So it's a kind of politics that gets out of this got you, put you down, money corrupted system. And
we need to go.
Oh.
Yeah, they're telling me that I got 1 minute. So, John, where can they get your book? Where can they get? I mean, I know your webpage is loaded with information, so just plug away.
Yeah, just go. Or the other thing, too, is just if you want to see a whole sample of my books, easiest way is to go at Amazon.com and type in your search JOHNHOGUE, John Hogue. And then there's a beautiful page there which shows everything that I've got for sale, including printed books versions, as well, if you don't want to do ebooks. And they're all down at bargain prices right now. And the top of the column will be my newest book, just look for the big green eye. And that's the book called 10 Predictions for 2015 and the Future of Richness.
Perfect. John, you're a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. And there's the music, which means I definitely got to go. So you have a great night, okay?
You have a great night, too.
All right. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And next week, we're going to be speaking with Bernie Siegel about healing, gratitude, and love. And after that, with Neil Donald Walsh about God's message to the world. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.